tolerate. I don't want no limit. When I come, this is no visit. Every place we look to conquer it. Hey, give me a rhythm.
All right, everybody. So thank you very much for joining us on this beautiful Monday morning in Trinidad and Tobago. Again, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We do appreciate it. All right, so here's what. This morning we look at government's refusal to answer questions about the firing of former Central Bank Governor Dr. Alvin Hilaire and WASA CEO Keith Halliday. When the matter was raised before Parliament on Friday by the opposition, the government sought protection under the standing orders. Well, to discuss this today is former President of the Senate and Attorney at Law, Timothy Hamel-Smith. Mr. Hamel-Smith, a very special good morning, and thank you very much for joining us, sir. We do appreciate it.
Good morning, Marlon. Thank you for inviting me to your show.
Absolutely, sir. All right, so here's what, for the benefit of our viewers this morning. The matter deals with two questions. It was laid in the Parliament by the opposition, and it really deals with the termination of former Central Bank Governor Dr. Alvin Hilaire and the termination of senior executives at the Water and Sewage Authority, including its CEO. All right, so as I said, the question was raised by two opposition MPs. The first question came from Diego Martin North East MP Colin Imbert, who asked the Finance Minister, Devindranath Tanku, can the Minister provide the reasons for the termination of the appointment of Dr. Hilaire? Now, Tanku rose and said, Mr. Speaker, I refer your attention to Standing Order 27(1)G as it relates to this question. Now, the Speaker of the House, Jagdev Singh, then clarified the provision which allows the Minister to decline to answer if, in their opinion, publishing the response would be contrary to the public interest. And, of course, then another question would have come, this time from Marvin Gonzalez, to the Public Utilities Minister, and the Public Utilities Minister invoked the same standing order. So, Mr. Hamel-Smith, is this something that we as a country should be concerned about?
Oh, certainly, this is the second occasion in the last two terms in which a governor, if we focus on the governor first of all, has been removed. And now we do have, having gone right up to the Privy Council, we do have a methodology for treating with these instances. It's not that they can't be done. We have to demonstrate that they were procedurally justified and lawful, and that there were grounds for dismissal. And those are the two things that one was focused on. It could well be that the Parliament may not be the forum in which that should be taken up, but I do expect, of course I can't predict, that the government should adopt a process which perhaps will require legal review, not simply, just a ministerial statement. I would want to go beyond that.
Yeah. All right. So again, let's look at the standing orders. So the standing orders, it is 27(1)G as it relates to the question, and it speaks about a provision which allows a minister to decline to answer if, in their opinion, publishing the response would be contrary to the public interest. And I guess that some people may say, well, if we are asking about the firing of individuals and government is being asked to account, and I suspect people may say, well, every government should be accountable to the people because it is the people who would have elected them, then how could this information be contrary to the public interest?
Yeah, so I don't think it is contrary to the public interest, but I do feel he may have, as I say, there is more than simply putting some facts before the Parliament. I think that one needs perhaps a legal opinion that underpins this. You need to look at the circumstances in which it happens. We now know what procedures need to be adopted based on that Privy Council decision. And I do think the government need to adopt that open, transparent sort of approach. And one hopes that they will still, in fact, conform to that, which I think it could well be that they two things. It's hard to speculate about these matters. I don't pretend to have, all the facts. I don't know if there are others who do. but there is a mechanism. For just cause, you can remove a central bank governor. There's no doubt about it. You have to go about it in a procedurally appropriate manner. And I do think the government should lay out what procedure they adopted. It would be a pity, in fact, if it was just a knee-jerk reaction. And that's something they owe the public in terms of what were their justification and did they adopt procedural fairness. And in their own interest, I think, they should do that. But do it properly. I'm not sure that the opportunity given to them in Parliament allowed them to adopt this particular approach. Actually lay before the public the legal opinion for what justified it and how they procedurally met the fairness provisions. I would expect that type of thing. Luckily, fortunately, there's there could have been, if in fact you just removed a governor and there was a gap, but obviously there was no gap. So the public appears to, at least the business and the banking community, appear to support the new governor. So that hurdle, if you like, has been crossed in terms of the transition. But the first part of it, I think the public deserve, the government should lay down these. One of the problems, from my perspective, is I don't know what the are there performance indicators for the governor? You would think the board should set that down so it's transparent. So when you decide to review a governor or anybody, a CEO, there are KPIs that you have to meet or not meet, as it were. You have some basis that has been set in advance. And more than that, I would like to see pay for performance so that there are incentives for good performance. And you need to set out, your board needs to set out, look, this is what we want to achieve over the next. Dr. Hilaire's appointment was a 3-year window, by the way. So what we have found is there were, under Section 12, the appointment is by the President on the advice of Cabinet. That's part of the process. And we've seen that happen in 2015, I think it was, and we saw it happen again on the end of the next 3-year period, 2018, and it was gazetted. What I have not been able to find, and I'm not saying that I have an exhaustive search, but I haven't been able to find the gazetting of Dr. Hilaire's reappointment, if you like, in 2023, which will have taken him to 2026. And that's something needs to be looked at. Because we don't have the Gazette, we don't even know if the President made an appointment. That is, I don't have the Gazette. It's something worth looking at as to whether his appointment had been gazetted. So if it wasn't, that is, poor, if you like, administrative hygiene to find that an important post like this. But, I'm subject to comment, somebody looking at all the gazetting and reviewing it. I didn't have much time between when I was called and today, but that's not an unimportant factor.
So, Mr. Hamel-Smith, this would have happened on Friday. Of course, let's look at the environment that this is happening in. And I want to ask the question, because I'm sure that some people may ask that this morning, but doesn't this give rise to what, let's say, the opposition has been saying, in that, well, these firings may have been politically motivated? That's one, but the opposition continues to speak about, if you look at the paper the newspaper this morning, PNM ready for battle. And it is speaking about 10,000 persons in the CPEP who have been sent home. It also speaks about 100 fired CPEP contractors consider legal action. So the question is when the government would have taken this decision on Friday, and we do not know what is going to happen, let's say today or the next few days. They may respond, but since Friday, there could be the narrative, well, here's what. This is what they have been involved in, which is really a witch hunt.
So you are right. If you leave a vacuum of information, there's going to be speculation, there's going to be conspiracy theories. And I do think that a government ought to come forward and set out, in the case of Governor Hilaire, or former Governor Hilaire, and the WASA CEO, what were the reasons, what procedural fairness did they approach this with, and what are the consequences? And I think, looking long term, because we don't want this repeating every 3 years or every 5 years because you have a change of government. I do think that we should be, for all positions like this, I would like to see key performance indicators set by the board. This is our anticipation. You have a 5-year window, a 3-year window. This is our expectations. And the country ought to know that, so that when you come to judge whether or not somebody has fulfilled their duties, you have a target that has been prearranged, not submitted after the event. So there's a lot that can be done that would improve going forward. And I think, sometimes when you have a crisis, it's an opportunity as well. So it's an opportunity to reset and have a better approach to these appointments. And that the public should be it's the public's money at the end of the day, take into account. These are set by the board. This is the KPIs. This is what our expectations are. This is where we would expect. And frankly, you don't wait until, let's say, the end of 5 years to determine. Every 2 years, you should review how are we doing along this, spectrum in terms of achieving the target. Because some targets aren't achievable in a single year or 2 years, but you want to know that you are going along the right path, and that you don't find at the end of 5 years you just drop off the cliff and nothing has transpired. And we need to have that sort of practice, as it were.
But is there a need for a review of, let's say, the entire system? Because it would seem that after every general election, you have a number of people being fired. There are allegations of political affiliation. There are problems when it comes to continuity, and more so continuity of projects. So in that light, is there a need for a total overhaul of the system? Of course, I think that what transpires here is what we see sometimes in the United States, right? Where when the regime is changed, people resign and they go home. But some people in Trinidad, sometimes they want to hold on, right? But there's always these allegations, or always allegations of, these people had political links.
Yeah, we certainly need to revisit that. We've created that culture since 1960. I suppose we didn't have any change in governments until 81, 86. Mm-hmm. But we've created that culture since 86, where, with a change in government, there's a big fallout, as it were, because the feeling is that people were appointed. I mean, if you look back at the WASA question, one of the concerns of the country, if you like, that you hear, and I have no doubt, even in this last appointment, that there was overstaffing. That was part of what is, I hear the government saying, look, they intended to take 2,500 people and send them home. And why that's happening? Because I think all governments have been using WASA particularly, but other institutions as feather bedding, you know. I want to give jobs to friends and family or my constituents, and that we have to take a far more business-like approach to this. You cannot carry on any institution, any corporate institution as well, in that particular manner. There is an optimum number of people required to perform. Of course, WASA in this case is a bit unwieldy. It's a large organization, and maybe we need to zone it, and each zone has its own targets to meet, so you know where the shortfall is. Maybe some zones are doing better than others. A much tighter operation. And Trinidad and Tobago needs to revisit the culture, if you like,
yes,
of administration. Because at this point, people say, well, the last government did it, so why shouldn't we do it, you know? And we just roll over like this.
Yeah.
And it's a time for resetting and setting new parameters, a new approach to governance for all these institutions, and that the fairness, procedural fairness, justification, and not just dream up some rationale for why you want to do something, but rather it's set there. You know what the parameters are when you became governor or CEO. This is what you expected to achieve.
Yes.
With 2-year reviews, you don't just want to arrive at 5 years and say, well, you didn't make, you know, if a man isn't performing in a 2-year window, it's time to take action then, not
yes,
5 years later.
I just want to continue along the road of where you said, and you would have spoken about paid for performance. Today, the Prime Minister's Pension Amendment Bill 2025 will be debated in the Senate. Of course, it deals with the pension of a Prime Minister. If you allow me to just refer to a story in the newspaper today. So it says, it simply cannot be deemed fair for an individual to serve as Prime Minister for a minimal period and subsequently receive a lifetime monthly pension of $87,000, and that's according to Legal Affairs Minister Saddam Hussein. This is what he would have stressed yesterday. And talking about the issue of paid for performance, are you, or is this debate, or what you have heard or seen so far concerning this matter, is it of interest to you at all?
Oh, certainly. We do need to set these things out in advance. What our expectations are. In the case of this particular issue, you know, I do think, frankly, I think, and I've said, I think Mr. Young ought to have volunteered to give up the pension. I think that was a proper thing to do. On the other hand, so you have legislation here, and the legislation, because it has components of retroactivity, is being passed with a 3/5 majority. But there were alternatives, I think, anyhow, where you could have achieved the same objective without introducing a 3/5 majority requirement. Maybe it is the government. Of course, I only see part of the picture, and the government thought it was necessary. I thought that the approach of, you know, after 2 years, you know, proportionally, that makes absolutely good sense. You get a percentage according to the number of years you served in a 5-year term. We'll see, you know, what happens in the Senate. As I say, perhaps there's a second play, if you like, that can occur by coming back with a bill which doesn't necessarily require that 3/5 threshold.
Yeah.
but it's in the hands of the independent senators. My understanding is the PNM abstained from voting in the House. Is that what the approach was, or one got the sense that they understood this was the right thing to do, but I may be mistaken. I didn't get the outcome of Friday's debate.
Yes.
But I get that impression that even on their side, and the government, of course, had the 3/5 majority they required in the House, one contemplated, of course, that there may have been a division in the opposition where part may have voted for and against. But as it turns out, they decided, I understand, I may be wrong, to just not vote, to abstain, as it were, and not vote, which I think sends a signal. We don't want to otherwise here we'll be pointing at their own man, as it were, in some way not coming up to mark.
Yeah.
But it's a good piece of legislation. I think it's a fair piece of legislation going forward to allow for that. I'm not saying that when it was introduced, anybody thought this would happen, but events occur, and that you must use them as lessons to learn going forward.
Yeah. Ms. Hamel-Smith, is there anything else you'd like to add as we come to, as we bring a close to our discussion this morning?
Well, as I say, I think we require a major reset in all our institutions. I like the idea that we set targets for people at the beginning of their engagement. I like the idea that you review that every 2 years and make an assessment, at the end of whatever period is appropriate by which you expect to achieve it. And you need milestones. You don't wait until the end. I look back, I don't know if you know about Atlantic LNG, but there was a disruption in the construction of Atlantic LNG. That's what they did. They said, look, we'll give you bonuses, we'll bring up your salary, we'll give you performance targets, but there were milestones to achieve. And as it happened, Atlantic LNG was on budget, it was on target, on time. That's something we need to create right through the country. We need to change the culture, as it were, of how people are engaged. This is serious business. We're really at a crisis point, and the way we go forward from now will determine. It's not a Vicky-Vi type of approach. We really have to get serious, as it were, and perform, and our governance needs to take a different model.
Yes. Timothy Hamel-Smith, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for speaking with us this morning, sir. We do appreciate it. Bye for now.
Thank you again for inviting me. Great to be on TV6 once more.
All right, bye for now, sir. All right, it's time for a very quick break, everybody. We're coming back.
It. I don't want no limit. When I come, this is no visit. Every place we look to conquer it. Hey, give me a rhythm.